So, today I wanted to talk about divine will. Can a rational human being experience and perceive something that one might call divine will? There are a lot of people who are satisfied with a belief in a God. They believe in an image of a God. To me, that's not irrational, that's just fantasy. You know, if one goes through hard times where life just takes you and you don't seem to have the power to get out of that bad situation, and then you lose your naivety. Is it do we say it like that in English? You're no longer naive because you learn that life is not always just beautiful. And then it's no longer possible to just, or it becomes hard to just be faithful to a good God. That's when a person turns into a rational person and says, I have to do it on my own and I have to take care of life by myself. And I'm asking, can a rational human being like that perceive and experience something that one might call divine will still? There was a point in my life when I have experienced something that I have called divine will. And then I went through shit, and that turned me into a controlling personality, a big ego. uh, but I didn't lose my fascination for spirituality, but I was no longer able to believe in something that wasn't like real, like that I could perceive with my own eyes and senses, so that I can just say it's real or it makes sense. So I wasn't able to just pray to angels and spirit guides and light beings and a God, because I understood that it's just in my mind. I don't want to believe in something. I want to have something that's true, right? So here's what I've found. Uh, I've investigated the nature of the self, the psychological self. And when you are investigating yourself, when I say you, I mean the psychological self, uh, then you have to come to the conclusion that the you, the controller uh, of life, the feeling that one is separate from life, controlling life, deciding what should happen and what shouldn't happen, that sense of self, that's a psychological self that is conditioned by the past. People who go through life, they're getting old. They're basically just re-experiencing everything they have already experienced to the age of 20. I came to the conclusion that that's all the ego can do. It can only repeat the past, because it is a conditioned entity. It only knows the past. It only knows the known. So every time it wants to make a decision, every time it wants to try and control reality, the only way it can do it is by bringing in that which it already knows into the present, trying to change what is. For example, when you're sad and angry or heartbroken or whatever, you use your old tactics to try and change what is. And therefore you cannot help but to just relive what you have already experienced. So that I have seen this in myself, and at that point, I had to like accept the fact that I, psychological self, do not have the power to change myself or to change my life circumstance. If I would try and change me as a psychological self or try and change my life circumstances, then I could use my will, seemingly, and then things seem to change, of course. But then I would change what is with what I know from the past, and I would relive the same experiences that I've already experienced, just in another form, in another shape, in another color. And then I will ask myself, why am I still suffering? Why am I always experiencing the same thing? That's what people go through. So I had to, like, I saw that I don't have the power to create something new because the psychological self, can only bring about the old. It only knows the known, the old. So if I want to have something new, I don't know where to get that from. I just know that I don't have the power to do it. In that moment, there was a total surrender. And there was no need to believe in something higher. There was just radical stop. And then there was just this natural realization that life itself is the intelligence that brings about something new. So there is divine will happening all the time, even masquerading as a separate ego that seems to control its own life, its individual life. Once the ego itself realizes that it cannot bring real change, it cannot bring about real change, then it just stops. And then what remains is divine will that you don't have to believe in. You just see that's there. It makes total sense. There's no longer an inner fight, inner resistance to what is. For example, when you are, let's use anger for an example. You're angry. Normally, we don't like anger. It's painful, you know. It's a physical pain to be angry. Especially if you're spiritual, you think that you shouldn't be angry. You're too spiritual for that. So you try to meditate it away. A lot of people who consider themselves to be meditators use focus to meditate. Of course, that can be helpful, but in my view, that's not. That's still becoming. You know, you're trying to become something, and as long as there is a method in your meditation, there's still an ego, a separate self. A separate self cannot survive without a tool. You know, when you give yourself a tool called mindful breathing, then the ego must survive. So when you're just sitting and you're being there, then there is no longer a separate self, or you start to see it, and you start to notice that that's not who I really am, and you more and more realize that you can never find out who you really are until you find out that you are not. And there's just a happening, and you're nothing, none of that, and everything. I don't want to sound too mystical, but there, in this realization, there's just, you're no longer fighting life. The one that's trying to control life is no longer standing in the way. So what takes place is just a thing called life energy. Life energy starts to just live through you. So you are sacrificing your ego to God. so that God can give you actual guidance. We can express it like that, you know. But you're no longer saying, but how? But how? How should I do? When should it will happen? You don't know what's good for you. It knows what's good for itself, and you're not separate from it. You know, it is naturally, it will naturally bring about harmony first within and then without. In the beginning, it can look like chaos. That's totally good. So there's no need to believe in free will anymore, because one realizes that free will is a concept that thinking came up with. You know, the belief in free will only exists because one believes in choice, you know? And what is the thing that chooses between two choices? You know, it is just the conditioning that's happening. And once that is seen, there's no longer a fight against life. You know, the conditioning doesn't try to, uh, it's no longer in conflict with itself. So it's just allowing itself to flow. There's no conflict within, so energy can flow. And then that energy serves itself. Not in the way that the ego wants, but it's just, it brings about harmony, clarity, energy. Relationships are better. We're becoming more authentic. You know, all that stuff. And you cannot gather what I say and and then say, I understand it now. You cannot understand this. You can seemingly understand this, you know, if it makes sense what I'm saying, but it has to be a lived experience. Otherwise, it's just knowledge that the ego is holding on to. So just try and sit and meditate. And in the meditation, don't do a technique. When you're just being without technique, then you will see how the ego doesn't like it. It's uncomfortable. It wants to have something to do. It wants to, what should I do? Is this the right meditation? Uh, just watch the ego as it's trying to find out what to do, and don't give it a method. Then the separate self will just naturally just lose power, and you will see that things are just naturally happening by themselves, and you are not doing anything. You're just like an empty space in which happenings happen. And there's a new kind of intelligence that doesn't come from the limited past of the ego, There's a new kind of intelligence that will start to do what's necessary to bring about harmony and clarity. It doesn't take any effort. The only effort that you have to do is to stop effort. Doesn't mean that you have to scroll on TikTok. That's still effort. That's the inability of one to be with himself or herself. I'm not saying that it's bad to sometimes watch TikTok, YouTube, Netflix, stuff like that, or even play video games. I'm not saying that anything is wrong or right. I'm just saying that be aware if you are doing those things and at the same time you find yourself being unable to just be with yourself without entertainment. I feel like awareness is naturally there. It's not something you do, it's there. There are two things you can do with it. Either you're being absorbed, so it's an external thing that is sucking your energy, right? Or you're not absorbed, you're present, and there's still awareness, and now that awareness can bring about harmony and energy. It is charging you, and when you cannot be with yourself, then you will always be an addict to something that you want to consume, and it's, your attention is never with you. It's always in something, so you waste your energy. You see? But when it's with you, notice what happens. You don't have to do anything. The ego interprets this wrong when spiritual teachers say, be aware. Sounds like something you must do. Like be aware as opposed to not be aware. You shouldn't be not aware. Or did I say this right? Make sure that you are aware. Don't be unaware. It's like a wrong or right thing. As if there is a self that could be unaware. You are awareness. Awareness cannot be unaware. Can be clouded by thoughts, but who's there to fight it? It's just another thought. So just be as you are. There's no technique in meditation. Meditation is the end of techniques. People are so conditioned the moment they wake up, they are just routine. It's just routine. There's never a pause. Meditation is that pause. Meditation is not just another thing you do. It is, you take your time to not do. If you ask me, that's real meditation. There are a lot of meditation techniques, and I'm not saying that these are wrong. They can be helpful for certain people, for certain situations, but real meditation is not a method. It's not a method. In real meditation, you just are already that presence, that space in which everything happens. There is nobody doing anything. And in that non-doing, it starts to cleanse. Energy starts to refresh itself. When you're constantly absorbed in doing, in routine, energy gets dirty. When your energy is clean, life becomes clean.